The evening sun cast long shadows across the Thompson family's modest dining room as Michael carefully adjusted his tie, even though the workday had ended hours ago. 20 years at First National Bank had ingrained certain habits so deeply that removing his tie felt like betraying an old friend. The mahogany table, a wedding gift from Sarah's parents, bore the gentle scars of family life, crayon marks from Emma's art projects, coffee rings from countless morning newspapers, and the faint outline where Sarah graded papers late into the night. Emma bounced in her chair, her pigtails dancing with each movement as she pushed green beans around her plate with the determination of a small architect designing an escape route. At 8 years old, she possessed that rare combination of boundless curiosity and fearless honesty that made adults simultaneously proud and terrified. Her school backpack lay open beside the table, spilling out worksheets about money through history, a project that had consumed her attention for weeks. Sarah moved between the kitchen and dining room with the practiced efficiency of someone who had perfected the art of managing both a classroom full of third graders and a household. Her auburn hair caught the lamplight as she set down a steaming casserole, the same recipe her mother had taught her, the same one Emma would probably learn someday. The rhythm of their evening routine felt as solid and dependable as the bank vault Michael secured every night before coming home. "Daddy," Emma said suddenly, her voice cutting through the comfortable silence like a stone through still water. She had stopped pushing her green beans and was looking at him with those enormous brown eyes that seemed to see through everything. Past his banker's composure, past his carefully maintained professional facade, straight to the questions he had never allowed himself to ask. "Why can't we trust the bank?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that shouldn't exist. Michael's fork paused halfway to his mouth, a piece of chicken suspended in time and space. Sarah looked up from serving Emma's milk, her eyebrows raised in that way that meant she was curious to hear his answer, but also slightly amused by their daughter's latest philosophical inquiry. The question wasn't accusatory or challenging in the way an adult's might be. It was pure, innocent curiosity, which somehow made it more dangerous than any corporate audit he had ever faced. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Michael asked, setting down his fork with the careful precision of someone buying time to think. But Emma had already moved past politeness into that territory where children venture fearlessly, asking the questions that adults spend their entire careers avoiding. "Well, if banks are supposed to help people, why did Mrs. Martinez cry when she came out of your bank yesterday? And why does Jake's family have to move away just because the bank said no to something?" Emma's eyes never left his face, and Michael felt something shift in his chest, like a door being opened in a room he had kept locked for 20 years. Michael's sleep that night was fractured, filled with dreams of bank vaults that wouldn't close and children's voices echoing through marble corridors. He woke before his alarm, staring at the ceiling as dawn painted grey shadows across their bedroom walls. Sarah slept peacefully beside him, her breathing steady and undisturbed by the questions that had kept him awake. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that the system you've dedicated your life to might not be as benevolent as you've always believed? The morning routine proceeded as usual. Coffee brewing, Sarah preparing Emma's lunch with military precision, Emma chattering about her upcoming presentation on future money. But beneath the familiar rhythm, Michael felt the weight of unspoken questions pressing against his chest like a physical ache. Every mundane detail seemed suddenly fragile, as if Emma's simple inquiry had revealed hairline cracks in the foundation of everything he thought he knew. At First National Bank, the marble floors gleamed under fluorescent lights that had hummed the same tune for decades. Michael nodded to familiar faces, Mrs. Henderson opening her weekly savings account, old Tom depositing his social security check, young couples nervously discussing their first mortgage. These were good people, trusting people, people who believed that banks existed to help them build better lives. The weight of their trust had never felt heavier than it did this morning. Robert Sterling emerged from his corner office like a general surveying his domain. At 65, the bank president carried himself with the authority of someone who had never been questioned, never been wrong, never been forced to explain why certain families qualified for loans while others didn't. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his suit impeccable, his smile practiced and warm in the way that successful bankers learned to perfect. "Michael, good morning." Sterling's voice carried the confident boom of prosperity. "I trust you had a pleasant evening with the family?" The question was polite, routine, but Michael found himself wondering if Sterling's own children had ever asked uncomfortable questions about their father's work. The morning proceeded with its usual parade of approvals and denials, profit margins, and risk assessments. Michael found himself studying the faces of applicants with new eyes, seeing beyond their credit scores to the stories Emma had somehow perceived. Mrs. Rodriguez, applying for a small business loan to expand her restaurant, denied due to insufficient collateral. The Johnsons, seeking to refinance their home after medical bills, rejected for too much existing debt. Each rubber stamp felt heavier in his hand. During lunch, Michael drove past Jake Martinez's modest house on the outskirts of town. The for sale sign in the front yard looked like a surrender flag. Jake sat on his porch, laptop balanced on his knees, completely absorbed in whatever appeared on his screen. The neighborhood kids whispered that he worked with computer money, which their parents dismissed as foolish games for people who couldn't understand real finance. But watching Jake's intense concentration, Michael wondered if perhaps the adult dismissal was the foolish thing. That evening, Emma spread her school project across the living room floor with the enthusiasm of an archaeologist unveiling ancient treasures. Pictures of ancient coins, barter systems, paper money, and something new, colorful diagrams of digital currencies that looked more like abstract art than financial instruments. "Look, Daddy," she said, pointing to a printout about Bitcoin. "This money doesn't need banks at all. People can send it directly to each other, like passing notes in class, but for grown-ups." Michael knelt beside her, studying the materials with genuine curiosity for the first time. The diagrams looked foreign, almost mystical, but Emma's explanation cut through the complexity with startling clarity. So if Mrs. Martinez needed to send money to her family, she could do it herself without asking permission from anyone. The innocence of the question struck him like lightning. Why should financial freedom require permission at all? The following Saturday morning found Michael standing at the edge of his comfort zone, literally and figuratively. Jake Martinez's house sat at the end of a gravel road where the manicured lawns of respectable Millbrook gave way to practical gardens and cars that prioritized function over appearance. Michael had driven past this neighborhood countless times, but never really seen it. The place where people lived when banks had said no to their dreams. Jake answered the door with the cautious expression of someone unaccustomed to unexpected visitors, especially visitors wearing pressed khakis and polo shirts from the country club pro shop. At 35, he possessed the lean build of someone who forgot to eat when consumed by work, and his eyes held the intensity of someone who saw patterns others missed. His living room was a fascinating chaos of multiple computer monitors, cryptocurrency mining equipment, humming quietly in corners, and whiteboards covered with calculations that looked more like mathematical poetry than financial planning. "You're from the bank," Jake said, not accusatory but matter-of-fact, as if he'd been expecting this visit for years. "Let me guess. Someone sent you to warn me about the dangers of corrupting young minds with radical ideas about money." There was no bitterness in his voice, only the weary patience of someone who had explained himself too many times to people who weren't really listening. Michael felt heat rise in his cheeks, suddenly aware of how he must appear. The respectable banker slumming in the questionable neighborhood, probably fulfilling some obligation to investigate the local troublemaker. "Actually," he said, surprising himself with his honesty, "my 8-year-old daughter has been asking questions I can't answer. About trust, about why people cry when they leave banks, about whether there might be better ways to handle money." Something shifted in Jake's expression, the defensive walls lowering slightly. "Your daughter asked those questions?" He stepped aside, gesturing for Michael to enter. Smart kid. Most adults spend their entire lives avoiding those exact thoughts. The house smelled of coffee and electronics, with the comfortable disorder of someone who prioritized ideas over appearances. For the next 2 hours, Jake walked Michael through a world that existed parallel to everything he thought he knew about money. Bitcoin wasn't just digital currency. It was philosophy made manifest, a system designed around the radical idea that people should control their own financial destiny without requiring permission from institutions. Jake's passion was infectious, his explanations remarkably clear for concepts that seemed impossibly complex just days earlier. The traditional banking system, Jake explained, pulling up charts that looked like mountain ranges of data, is built on the assumption that people can't be trusted to manage their own money. But Bitcoin flips that assumption. It says the institutions can't be trusted to manage people's money fairly. He showed Michael transaction records, transparent and permanent, where every movement of value was recorded, but every person remained anonymous and free. Michael found himself thinking of Mrs. Martinez, of the Johnson family, of all the people whose financial lives he had controlled with rubber stamps and risk assessments. But surely there are dangers, he said, grasping for the arguments he had always assumed were valid. Volatility, security risks, lack of regulation. Of course there are risks, Jake nodded. But ask yourself this. Is the risk of a new system that puts people in control of their money really greater than the risk of an old system that puts banks in control of people? The question hung in the air like Emma's inquiry 2 nights earlier, simple and devastating in its clarity. As Michael drove home, his mind raced with implications and possibilities. For 20 years, he had been a gatekeeper, deciding who deserved financial opportunity and who didn't. But what if the gate itself was the problem? What if Emma's innocent question had been pointing toward a truth so obvious that only a child could see it clearly, that maybe people didn't need gates at all? Monday morning arrived with the weight of a secret Michael wasn't sure he wanted to keep. Sarah noticed his distraction over breakfast, the way he stared at his coffee as if searching for answers in the dark liquid. Emma chatted excitedly about her presentation later that week, oblivious to the storm her simple question had unleashed in her father's carefully ordered world. The normalcy of their morning routine felt like a performance now, each familiar gesture hiding the growing realization that everything he had built his life around might be fundamentally flawed. At the bank, Michael moved through his responsibilities with mechanical precision, but his heart wasn't in the approvals and denials. When Margaret Whitman applied for a small loan to cover her mother's medical expenses, he found himself studying her file differently. On paper, she was a risk. Single mother, part-time income, limited collateral. But sitting across from him was a daughter desperate to help her dying mother. And for the first time in his career, Michael wondered if the risk assessment was measuring the wrong things entirely. The whispers started during lunch. Michael overheard fragments of conversation in the break room, something about that Martinez character and strange visitors, and people asking questions they shouldn't ask. Small towns had invisible networks of information that moved faster than any digital currency, and apparently his Saturday visit had already become community knowledge. Betty from customer service gave him a pointed look that suggested she knew exactly where he had been and what that meant for his standing in Millbrook's social hierarchy. Robert Sterling appeared at Michael's office door that afternoon with the purposeful stride of someone addressing a problem before it became a crisis. "Michael, I've been hearing some concerning rumors," he said, settling into the chair across from Michael's desk with the authority of someone who had never been refused anything. "Something about you visiting our local cryptocurrency enthusiast? I'm sure it's just idle gossip, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to set the record straight." The moment stretched between them like a tightrope. Michael could feel the weight of his 20-year career, his reputation, his family's security, all balanced on whatever words he chose next. The safe answer was ready on his tongue, a dismissal, an explanation that would satisfy Sterling and restore the comfortable order of things. But Emma's voice echoed in his memory, asking why people couldn't trust banks. And suddenly, the safe answer felt like betrayal. "I went to learn," Michael said simply. "My daughter has been asking questions about money, about fairness, about why our financial system works the way it does. I realized I couldn't answer her honestly because I'd never really examined those questions myself." The truth felt dangerous and liberating at the same time, like stepping off a cliff without knowing if there was ground below. Sterling's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, disappointment, and finally a cold calculation that Michael had never seen directed at him before. "Michael, you've been with this bank for 2 decades. You understand how important community trust is to our institution. When our own managers are seen associating with people who advocate for alternatives to traditional banking, it sends a very problematic message to our customers." "What if the message isn't the problem?" Michael asked, surprising himself with his boldness. "What if the system that requires that message is the problem?" The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been smoldering for years, finally bursting into flame. Sterling stood slowly, his face settling into the expression of someone who had just realized that a trusted employee had become a liability. "I think you need to consider very carefully what's important to you, Michael. Your career, your family's security, your place in this community. These things matter more than the philosophical musings of computer programmers and 8-year-old children." He paused at the door, his final words delivered with the weight of ultimatum. "I trust you'll make the right choice." Alone in his office, Michael stared out the window at the town square, where families walked their dogs and children played on swings, all of them trusting that the institutions around them were working in their best interests. For the first time in his adult life, he wondered if that trust was misplaced, and if his daughter's innocent question had revealed a truth that could change everything. The breaking point came on Thursday afternoon when Sterling called Michael into his office with the gravity of a funeral director. The quarterly reports were spread across his desk like evidence in a trial, and his expression held the cold satisfaction of someone about to deliver unpleasant but necessary justice. "Michael, we need to discuss the Riverside neighborhood situation," he said, gesturing to a file that Michael recognized with growing dread. Riverside was where families like the Martinezes lived, where people worked multiple jobs to keep modest homes and send their children to the same schools as bankers' kids. It was also, according to the reports Sterling showed him, the bank's least profitable sector. "The numbers are clear," Sterling continued, his voice taking on the clinical tone of someone discussing mathematical abstractions rather than human lives. "These accounts require disproportionate resources while generating minimal revenue. The board has decided we need to close approximately 40% of these accounts and redirect our services toward more profitable demographics." Michael stared at the list of names, recognizing families he had watched struggle and save, children he had seen grow up, elderly couples who had trusted First National with their life savings. "You're talking about cutting off banking services for people who need them most," he said, his voice barely steady. "Where are they supposed to go? What are they supposed to do?" "That's not our responsibility, Michael. Our responsibility is to our shareholders and our profitable customers." Sterling's words cut through the air with the precision of someone who had practiced this speech, who had anticipated and prepared for every objection. "I need you to handle the notifications. Your relationships with these families will make the transition smoother." The request hit Michael like a physical blow. Sterling wasn't just asking him to implement a policy that would devastate vulnerable families. He was asking him to be the face of that devastation, to look people in the eye and tell them their money wasn't welcome anymore. The irony was cruel and perfect. His 2 decades of building trust with these communities had made him the ideal weapon to destroy that trust. "I can't do that," Michael said, the words emerging with startling clarity. "I won't do that." The refusal felt like stepping off a cliff, but also like finally breathing freely after holding his breath for 20 years. Sterling's face darkened with the expression of someone unaccustomed to defiance. "Then I'm afraid we have a problem, Michael. Your job description includes implementing bank policy, regardless of your personal feelings about that policy. If you can't fulfill those responsibilities, perhaps it's time to reconsider whether this position is right for you." Michael thought of Emma's presentation tomorrow, of her innocent faith that her father would choose courage over comfort, truth over security. He thought of Jake Martinez's passionate explanation of systems designed to serve people rather than institutions. Most of all, he thought of all the families whose trust he would betray if he followed Sterling's orders, and he realized that some betrayals were worse than losing a job. "You're right," Michael said, standing up with a strange sense of peace. "This position isn't right for me anymore. Not if it means choosing profits over people, not if it means telling families they don't matter because their bank accounts aren't big enough." He walked toward the door, each step feeling like walking toward a new life he couldn't yet imagine, but somehow trusted completely. Emma's presentation was scheduled for Friday afternoon, but by then, the entire town knew that Michael Thompson had quit his job at First National Bank. The news traveled through Millbrook like wildfire, carrying with it whispers of scandal, speculation about mental breakdowns, and predictions of financial ruin for the Thompson family. Sarah's initial shock had given way to a mixture of fear and admiration that left her speechless when Michael explained what had happened. Standing in the elementary school auditorium, watching Emma confidently explain her research about future money to an audience of parents who had already heard about her father's professional suicide, Michael felt a strange combination of terror and pride. Emma spoke about Bitcoin with the clarity of someone who hadn't yet learned that new ideas were supposed to be frightening, describing a world where people controlled their own money without needing permission from institutions. "My daddy taught me that sometimes grown-ups build systems that aren't fair," Emma said, her 8-year-old voice carrying through the auditorium with startling authority. "But that doesn't mean we have to keep using those systems forever. Sometimes we need to be brave enough to try something better." She looked directly at Michael as she spoke, and in her eyes he saw not just love, but respect. The respect of someone who had asked a difficult question and watched her father choose the difficult answer. The applause was polite but scattered, and Michael could feel the weight of judgment from parents who considered his family a cautionary tale about the dangers of radical thinking. But scattered throughout the audience were other faces: Mrs. Martinez, the Johnsons, families who had been denied loans or faced with impossible fees, and their expressions held something different. Not judgment, but recognition. The recognition of people who had always suspected the system was rigged against them and had finally seen someone with inside knowledge confirm their suspicions. 3 months later, Michael sat in Jake Martinez's living room, which had been transformed into an informal community education center. Families gathered twice a week to learn about cryptocurrency, financial independence, and alternatives to traditional banking. The work paid less than his bank salary and offered no benefits package, but watching elderly couples learn to send money directly to their grandchildren or young parents discover investment opportunities that didn't require a banker's approval, Michael felt richer than he ever had in 20 years of approving and denying other people's financial dreams. Emma bounded through the door after school, her backpack full of new questions about economics, technology, and justice. "Daddy," she said, settling beside him with the confidence of someone whose curiosity had already changed the world once. "I've been thinking about voting systems. Why do we let politicians decide things for us when technology could let everyone vote directly on everything?" Michael laughed, pulling his daughter close and preparing himself for another journey into uncharted territory, guided by the fearless wisdom of someone too young to know that some questions were supposed to remain unasked.